On today's episode of 90 Degrees, we take a look at how to approach betting certain awards markets in the NFL, a metric that provides opportunities betting alternative markets, and who's going to the Super Bowl. That and more on today's episode of 90 Degrees. Welcome to the 90 Degrees podcast, where we take an inside look into the sports betting industry. I'm your host, G-Stack George, and I'm excited because we're talking my favorite sport today, NFL football, and I've got a very special guest, ClevTA plus EV bettor, creator for the Hammer Betting Network, and owner of CleveAnalytics.com. Cleve, thanks for joining me.
Hey, George, how's it going?
I was excited when I finally saw that your preview had come out last week, and I got to dive into it. It's always a fascinating read. I always wonder, it's about 50 pages long. How long does it take you from start to finish to get this thing together?
It took me a good month or so. And again, this isn't my full-time gig. So I've got a full-time job. I just welcomed my second daughter to the world a couple months ago. So it's been pretty hectic and had to work a lot of nights and weekends. And my wife was great and let me do that. But I would have guessed it took me over, I would say 100 plus hours at least. It is one of those things where you start working on each team and you get down a rabbit hole and it takes you somewhere else to another team, and then I find some information or some stats or something interesting, and then I start working on that team, and it kind of goes in so many different directions. So it was hard to keep focused, but no, I really enjoyed doing it, and it was a labor of love, but it was something that I enjoyed putting together. And even the reason I put it together, just for some background, is last year I had no intention of doing it, and I was asked by somebody I knew who works with a really prominent NFL analyst, broadcaster, and he was looking for a good NFL preview and asked me if I had heard of any at the time. And it was like early June. And I said, no. And he said, well, why don't you put one together? I said, sure. So I just kind of scrambled and put that together pretty quickly. And I got a lot of great feedback, released it to the public. And, just everybody was asking me about it and thought it was a good resource. And so I decided I kind of had to do it again. So that's kind of why I did it. And at this point, I think I'm kind of stuck doing it every year now, but it does help me, at least personally, on top of, letting other people have, that resource. It's good for me personally in my personal betting.
Now, you say it took over a month. Do you have days where you literally can crank out 4 or 5 good hours and knock out like 6, 7 teams, and then days where you're like, I don't even want to write anything at
Yeah,
all? And
honestly, it was to the point where I mean, I could never do 4, 5, 6 teams in a day. It was literally one, maybe start a second per day, and that's like working 4 or 5 hours. Like I said, it took me to different directions, and it was hard to really sit and just write one full team and get it all done pretty quickly. It was just a lot that I wanted to put in there. And you could see is there's unfortunately when you print it out, it's like the font is pretty small. It's a lot better when you look online and on your computer, and you can increase the size of the font. I had to cut stuff down. Like I would write and I would realize, wow, I'm like 200 words over what can fit in here. And so I would have to pare it down. And so I got rid of a bunch of stuff too, unfortunately, but I just kind of I think the beauty of it that people really like is just having it in one page. It's not I wasn't looking to write a 500 page, encyclopedia. I think that it just kind of gets way overdone. It's just not necessary. You're just filling it with stuff. So just having it all concise in one page, I think was really important. So that was really the reason for that. And just, if I could get 2 in a day, I was lucky.
Yeah, with those longer books, I found myself reading 40% of it, just figuring out, okay, this is the tidbits that I find valuable. Whereas yours was one sheet, one team, a lot of an easier read. But you don't just cover teams; you also give like a league look perspective from like a bigger picture. One of the things I found interesting, because we're anticipating a lot of first year rookie quarterbacks starting this year, you found out some interesting data about what it looks like with a first year starter. Can you share a little with us?
Yeah, so I went back essentially 20 years of data and win totals, and I just wanted to know for myself because I didn't really put it in context until I went back and looked at it. And I said, let's look at the teams with first round quarterbacks and then specifically top 5 quarterbacks, because all 3 of them this year, or top five in the draft. What did those teams do? How did those quarterbacks perform? And so, team quarterbacks that started at least half the team's games as a rookie. There was 41 of them since '02. In aggregate, those quarterbacks won just over 41% of their starts, and less than 50% went over their win total. So, against market expectations, those quarterbacks typically go under. Although when you look at the top five quarterbacks, 55% of those teams actually went over. So you get kind of the really bad teams, the dregs of the NFL. A lot of times those quarterbacks can push those teams over the win totals. I will say, since 2014, though, only 4 of 11 top five quarterbacks have gone over, and we've seen guys like Trevor Lawrence and Zach Wilson, recently really struggle as rookies. So it's a mixed bag. But I mean, I wouldn't expect a lot of great success early on. I was actually stunned to see this one. I mean, Tua in 2020 is the only top five quarterback to win more than 50% of his starts since Andrew Luck and RG3 did it in 2012. So it's essentially been once in the last 10 years that we've seen a top five quarterback on a team, and they won more than half their starts. So in general, it's not likely that you're going to see a huge win total in their first year. We have seen, I think, of all the types of quarterbacks, when you profile who's been the most successful amongst the rookies, it's really been the mobile quarterbacks. It's really been the guys who have able to use their legs as kind of giving them an increased floor from an EPA perspective. You look at the top three quarterbacks in the just in general, not even first round in EPA since 2002 were essentially all mobile quarterbacks: Dak, Russ Wilson, RG3. So that bodes well, really a lot for a guy like Anthony Richardson. Not sure about CJ Stroud or Bryce Young just from that perspective, but it's usually the guys that can run, who can make plays with their legs. They're the ones who can add value right away, because even if they're not good in the pocket and the first read's not there, they can always just take off with their legs. And I think that's something that definitely mobile quarterbacks have really helped increase some of the returns from these first year guys early on. But it's like I said, it's a mixed bag. I mean, we look at Carolina. Their win totals at 7. It's the highest for any first round, top five quarterback drafted in terms of a win total since the Jets and Mark Sanchez in '09. So their expectations are pretty inflated compared to what a typical top five team with a quarterback would look like. I will say, obviously, they traded up, so it's a little bit of a unique situation, but it's still one that people are very high on Carolina and Bryce Young, and it's definitely reflected in the win total. I did just a quick Twitter poll today just for fun, because I had mentioned that in the last 14 years or so, there's been at least one team with a win total where they're expected to be under 500. And they've made the playoffs. And I said, well, which one of these teams this year is it going to be? And almost everybody picked Carolina. It was pretty
Wow.
pretty stunning to see the intrigue and the interest in a team like Carolina with Bryce Young. It just kind of shows you how people just automatically assume that the number one picks are going to exceed expectations, and it's not always the case. So.
Hey, I want to talk about Pinnacle. Pinnacle is the world's sharpest sports book and available to bettors in Ontario. Find out what professional bettors have known for decades. Pinnacle is where the best bettors play. Must be 19 plus in Ontario. Please play responsibly. Not available in the US. Now back to the show. Sure. And I've got a lot of thoughts of that division where they're very fortunate for who they're playing, not only within the division, but also getting to play the weakest division on the AFC side, the other South division. So it sounds like it's a bit of a mixed bag. You don't read too much into it, but the markets tend to, be at least be optimistic about these first year quarterbacks. You had a couple surprise teams in the AFC and the NFC on teams that you think are going to exceed expectations. Let's start off in the AFC. Who's the team that you're backing way ahead of market?
Yeah, well, so there's two different ways to look at this. I mean, I think if you're just looking for kind of Super Bowl level team that's maybe not expected to make the playoffs, I would say the Browns. Just from that perspective, they're 22 to 1 to win the AFC. And, that's a team that's got, elite quality players all over the field. added a bunch in the offseason. Obviously, the Deshaun Watson question, but they're a team that if you're just looking for a non-playoff team, expected to make the playoffs to win the Super Bowl, that would be my top of the list in the AFC. But in general, just above market, I'm really in on the Colts this year. And it's funny because that was not a team that I expected to like going into this preview. But the more work I did on them, just evaluating again the background on the types of teams that or types of quarterbacks that do well their rookie year. Like I talked about mobile quarterbacks, the head coaches that do well in their first seasons, all those sorts of things, and just kind of what happened last year to the Colts that kind of wasn't needed to put in context in order to better understand what this year could be like. I just like them more and more. I mean, you look at, and it's also a combination of that plus fading a Jags team, which I think is a little bit overrated. I think that they've got a ton of issues, especially on the offensive line. Not only going to lose Jawan Taylor to Kansas City, your right tackle, your left tackle is Cam Robinson, who's going to miss the first 4 games. Their secondary is a mess. They played the easiest set of opposing pass offenses last year. So all those things, I think that you'll see a little bit of regression from Jacksonville, and just the rest of the division isn't great. But in terms of the Colts themselves, and I mentioned, even if Anthony Richardson does not show the upside that he's got kind of under his umbrella, it's one of those things where at minimum you'll start Gardner Minshew, who's won games in this league. He knows the Shane Steichen offense. You'll have a guy like Richardson in on short yardage situations. He could be pretty deadly with him and Jonathan Taylor in the RPO game. I think he's going to be, at worst, a guy that you can have a package of plays for as in the first half of the season. But then the upside is, he's just all these physical traits that made him, the best quarterback who's ever performed at the combine. They've got that upside there. Otherwise, I think you look, they still have pieces. Got Jonathan Taylor, you got pieces of a good offensive line. The receiving core is okay. You got Michael Pittman. You added Isaiah McKenzie, a receiver that I really liked in the draft, Josh Downs out of North Carolina, who's got some explosiveness. And then defensively, they were a top 15-ish defense last year, and that was without their best player, Shaq Leonard, their linebacker. He was gone for all but 3 games. He was hurt. And so, you look, they beat the Chiefs last year. They had the Eagles on the ropes. The Philly scored at the end to win that game. So they did perform pretty good against good teams. It was a matter of, Matt Ryan was just a walking turnover. They led the NFL with amount of EPA lost by turnovers on offense. 5 pick sixes or fumble recoveries for touchdowns led the NFL. It was just a complete mess. And you add the fact that the Jeff Saturday situation, and I just don't know anyone who that situation is just not going to happen again. So you bring a guy in, Shane Steichen, into the fold, comes in from obviously from a good pedigree with the Philadelphia background. He's going to bring plus EV situational decision making when it comes to 4th downs and 2-point conversions. It's going to pass ahead, to get ahead early in games, and then run the ball, hopefully to pad a lead. Like, he knows those things, inside and out from his days in Philly. So I think all of that combined, I just think that this is a team that has the ingredients to win, 8-9 games, and that can win this division. So for me, it's, they'd have no shot at a wild card, but it would be, to win the division. And so for me, like, I think the Colts have as much upside as any kind of bad team there is in the NFL.
All right. I see all those points. The one in the NFC is one that I am in lockstep on, because I think I've been tweeting about them for months, and I like everything about their situation. Who's your surprise team in the NFC that you're higher on than market?
I like the Packers, and I think they're kind of a darling of a lot of the sharper community. And it's kind of betting on that the tail outcomes for Jordan Love. And it's really, look, Aaron Rodgers was kind of a shell of himself last year. He's 21st in EPA, wasn't great, wasn't pushing the ball down the field, and they still won enough games to compete for the playoffs, and we're just under 500. And so you're essentially, if you can get a repeat performance of that, if Jordan Love can get into the, if he's the 20th best quarterback, they're probably going to win 9 games, 8-9 games. They face a much easier schedule this year. They actually face, again, this is all we know that year to year things change dramatically. But just just because it's interesting to look at, looking at EPA from last year, they will face he will face the easiest schedule of opposing pass defenses. So he does get the benefit of facing the Bears twice and the Falcons and a bunch of other teams that shouldn't be great from a pass defense perspective. So hopefully that helps. He gets a full off season with Matt LaFleur. They're going to install offense specifically for him. He's got the pedigree. He's a first round pick. This isn't a guy. We'll talk about Atlanta. This isn't Desmond Ritter, who was a third round pick and was passed up by a bunch of teams. Like, he was still a first round pick. He only has a handful of dropbacks in his career. Really has one start, and that was on a short week when Aaron Rodgers had COVID in Kansas City. He didn't look good. Okay, so there is a chance he's awful, right? But there's also a chance that he's just respectable, and I think that would be good enough in this NFC with a great run game, good offensive line, and we know a top 10 pass defense. All they have to do is shore up the run defense, which was bottom 5 the last 2 years, and I think they're good enough to at least get to 10 wins and win this division. So, and you never know what happens. If he's like, let's say he's actually better than we all think, he's the 10th best or the 12th best quarterback, then you've got a team that's really live to win the NFC. So I'm with
Yeah.
you. I've got plus 500 to win the North. And, I think there is definitely versions of Love and the Packers that can get them to an NFC championship game.
Yeah, there's a bunch of markets around the Packers that I've been interested in. One of them we'll talk about in a bit. When you talk about markets, you break down like what historically goes into winning the awards, which I found really a very a good tidbit for people to have. When you were learning about the MVP market, what were like some of the prerequisites of like past winners and what it takes to win the MVP?
Yeah, and I've tweeted about this for the last handful of years about it's and a lot of people have jumped on board, but a lot of these awards are pretty robotic when it comes to historical profiles of the types of players that can win, and it's at this point with MVP, it's definitely going to be a quarterback. That's 15 of the last 16 MVPs have been quarterbacks, 10 straight. I mean, Adrian Peterson's the last one who was a non-quarterback, and in a passing league, it's impossible really to even make a claim otherwise. So it's going to be a quarterback. In the last 15 seasons that the quarterback has won, those teams have averaged just over 13 wins per season. None were on a team with less than 11. So you don't have to just be good. You got to be one of the elites of the NFL. So when you're looking at types of teams and quarterbacks that can get there, you have to think about that. The average preseason win total for these teams has been double digits at 10. So we have seen some. I will say we've seen some quarterbacks on teams with win totals as low as 8.5. That's kind of the magic number. 3 of the last 5 years with Lamar Jackson, Mahomes, and Aaron Rodgers, those teams were all at 8.5. So you can find those teams that maybe were a little bit under the radar, that had quarterbacks that maybe weren't as proven yet. So it's pretty easy to filter out what the likeliest candidates are, who they're going to be, like Burrow, Mahomes, Hurts, and Allen. I put in the preview, and someone I think is worth taking a shot on is Lamar Jackson at 15-1 with the Ravens. I think that makes a lot of sense. I like Baltimore a lot this year. They've got a high win total. They easily can win 13, 14 games with all those new weapons and the Todd Monken offense. And so, and he's obviously won it before, so he's got the pedigree. I think he's definitely in play. But those are really, you're not going to find too many long shots that are even going to have a shot. I mean, I put Derek Carr as a long shot flyer at 45-1, only because the Saints have by far the easiest schedule in the NFL, according to my numbers. And he doesn't have to be great for them to win, 12, 13 games. I know it sounds crazy with the Saints team, but it is good, really good defense he's playing with. He's got some receivers and he's got a good offensive line. It's not inconceivable that they win 13, 14 games and in a bad NFC and he puts up good numbers. So that's amongst the long shots. He's the one guy that I would take a look at. But in general, it's usually the upper quarterback elites.
I feel like it's become an unbettable market for myself. Like, I think the word is out that it's a quarterback, and people usually tend to bet the elite ones, and they all have like suppressed odds. So it's not one of my favorite award markets to buy into. One of my favorites though is Coach of the Year, and last year you nailed it. You gave out Brian Daboll as Coach of the Year. What's the criteria? Because there's a very specific criteria when it comes to the Coach of the Year award, and a lot of people I feel don't understand that. Like Bill Belichick's what the greatest coach of our generation, or maybe it's Andy Reid, and they have what four Coach of the Year awards between them. They don't hand it out to the best Coach of the Year. Oftentimes, it's the guy who exceeds the biggest expectation, right?
Yeah, and I was actually having this conversation with someone last week because they liked Mike McCarthy, and I was like, it sounds great. They almost have to go undefeated to win that because it's not who's the best coach or who's the best team. Because yeah, then Belichick would have won it every year. It's who has kind of come out of nowhere and who's exceeded the market expectations the most. So when you look at the last 14, I mean, 14 straight winners of this award have been on a team that has won at least 9 games, but
Yep.
their average preseason win total is just over 7. No winner in the last 15 years came into the season on a team with a win total above 9.5. So if you're expecting to be a double digit playoff caliber team, you're just not going to win this award. So it's really those guys that are in that kind of 6 to 9 category, kind of in the sweet spot of win totals. And it's about 50%, almost half of the last 15 winners also have been first year head coaches. So again, it's a lot of the kind of what's new, what's flashy. And we saw, I mean, Brian Daboll checked every box going into last year. It's why he was on my list at the top. But that's really what you want to look for. And you might find certain situations like a Matt LaFleur or even a Dennis Allen on teams that just disappointed last year. But obviously, there's a narrative with a guy like LaFleur, right? Without Aaron Rodgers, there's a possibility that if they win 12, 13 games, that he's going to get consideration. So,
Yeah.
there are situations like that. But you're looking at guys like D'Amico Ryans, Matt Eberflus, Arthur Smith. I put Sean Payton in there, Dennis Allen, Frank Reich. Like those are probably at the top. And I ended up going with, again, back to my Colts theme. If I'm right on the Colts and they can get the 9 wins or even 10 and win the division, I think Shane Steichen would probably win it pretty easily. And he's at
Yeah.
25-1. So it kind of all goes hand in hand there. And he's a guy that I think, can make Anthony Richardson look good, and it's going to kind of all go together. And that's a guy that I think just for the value probably has the best out there. But there's plenty of guys that fit, but it don't look to any of these teams that are expected to do well. Like that's just not going to
Yeah.
serve you here. So
I often look at like Ron Rivera winning it twice and Matt Nagy winning it once as examples of this is what the award really is versus like Belichick's 2 wins. They went undefeated and 14-2. Like he had to go off the charts good just for them to consider him for the award. He's not even like a nominee in the finalists in the final three. Um Along with your theme, when I talked about wanting to bet on Jordan Love's like absolute right tail scenario. To me, Matt LaFleur was the market I wanted to attack. Right, there's obviously division, which is something I got interested in, but I think the narrative will be so strong if, with Aaron Rodgers gone, Green Bay improves and Jordan Love looks really good. It's going to be very hard not to give Matt LaFleur serious consideration if he gets to 10 or 11 wins and wins the division.
yeah, no, I agree. I think he's definitely, and I haven't checked in the last couple of days, but he was high up on the list, right? I mean, I think he's like 10-1.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of value that's kind of been
Oh,
sucked out of it.
he was higher like earlier in the offseason because
Yeah.
around the time when I was tweeting about Green Bay, like north of like plus 2,800 once
Yeah.
upon a time was coach of the year, right? And I'm like, all right, if I truly believe what I believe with the Packers, this is a market that makes a ton of sense.
Yeah, no, that's a great number. And so if they do get to 11, 12 wins, he'll definitely have a big case there. But I will say, you know, I guess it depends on Jordan Love. Like, what if Love is just average, but they're just dominant in the run game, their defense creating a bunch of turnovers? Does he get that kind of narrative credit? It might not. It might only be tied to Jordan Love, because if Jordan Love plays really well, then it's like, oh, LaFleur, this offensive genius. And again, a lot of this is just narrative based, right? And that's just how these awards are. I mean, these are voters that are humans, and they love narrative, the stories to get them to these awards. So that would be my only thing, is it almost is more tied to Jordan Love than it is to the team. But
Sure.
yeah, I mean, they're definitely in play, and you can just if you got him at over 20 to 1, I think it's a great number. Now, if it's 10 to 1 or 11 to 1, a lot of the value is sucked out of it. But he's clearly, up there from coach of the year perspective for sure.
If you asked me last year, I'd be a lot more certain of the answer. But honestly, I know Brian Dable, you got him across the line, but I really was surprised that Kyle Shanahan wasn't the coach of the year, considering they got to 13 wins, and he did it with like the narrative of three different starting quarterbacks. I thought, especially the last one being the very last pick in the draft, but I guess big New York media, even though they were projected at 7.5 wins, so it wasn't way over expectation. I guess like the New York media love was really strong with Brian Daboll there.
Yeah, but it's also, I mean, the average better does, or the average voter doesn't look at betting preseason markets,
I know.
right?
That's
So
the way we think of it, as like, here's what expectations are, but we don't realize that's the voters not thinking from a betting market perspective.
exactly, they're just looking at what the prior win total was, or what would they have, 4 wins the prior year, whatever it was. So it was a pretty big jump from there. But yeah, and it's just, but when I say the preseason win total, it's only because that's kind of a proxy for how the general public will look at how these teams should be. But in terms of the raw number, it's, the voters won't look at it that way. So but yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting. Yeah, and that's my kind of my point all along is, the Niners were in the NFC title game the year prior. So those voters have that in the back of their head. Well, they're just loaded everywhere else. So he doesn't really get credit, even though it was multiple quarterbacks. This team is so loaded. They were supposed to do well. So in some voters' minds, they'd rather go with the team that kind of came out of nowhere. So that's why a guy like Dayball would get it in a lot of those cases.
Hey, the easiest way to improve as a sports bettor is use multiple sports books and always get the best odds. We recommend using an odds comparison tool like BetStamp. BetStamp compares odds across every sports book for games, futures, and player props. Save time and money by checking BetStamp before you bet. Download the app today. If you're looking to sign up for a new sportsbook account, please check out the offers available at betstamp.app/circlesoft or hit the link in the description. If you sign up through this page, it helps support the show. Now back to the rest of the episode. All right, forgive me if I'm wrong here, but other than like true injury information where you can beat a market before it moves, oftentimes some of our bigger edges in the season come from teams that are way better than their record says based on their underlying metrics, and then oftentimes they're not as good as their underlying metrics say. Would you think that's an accurate description?
Yeah, I mean, you look at last year, Jacksonville was a perfect case where, if you see a team that's really getting unlucky early in the season, and the general market maybe is down on them, that's where it's an opportunity to back them. But I think that at this point, like, people are sharp enough to be aware of those teams that are underperforming or overperforming expectations. There's a reason why, like, Dallas was favored. If you remember, Dallas was favored in Minnesota,
Yeah.
that famous game where everybody was like, the general media couldn't believe that the Vikings, that were they might have had one loss at the time, were underdogs to a team that had multiple losses. And it's because, again, Minnesota was just winning all these close games late. They just were getting lucky from whatever point differential perspective and underlying metrics. And the same thing on the other side. I mean, Jacksonville was 1-6 to start the season, and they were really struggling from one score game perspectives, and they turned things around. Sorry, they were 3-7. And they were 1-6 in one score games, but we knew, if you were paying attention, they were just on the cusp, but they just weren't getting the job done and failing late. And then if you back them in the second half of the year, you were rewarded a lot. So, I think it's definitely a way to take a look. I mean, in season is a little different. I think from season to season, you get a little better sense of these teams that might regress, but in season, I think it's at least one of the pieces of the puzzle to trying to find those teams, maybe those diamond in the rough. But it's always difficult because you don't know when the turn is going to come. There are teams
Sure.
that are just unlucky all year long, right? And are
Uh-huh.
teams like Minnesota that were just exceeding and winning every close game all year long, and it's just hard to know exactly when that bubble's going to burst. So you just kind of have to ride the wave as much as you can.
For me, it was the Titans. Like for 2 years, I'm
Yeah.
like, oh, they're just not that good. Look at their metrics and like unstable 90% touchdown rate in the red zone. I'm like, there's no way they can play at this level. And like through 10 games, I'm like, oh my God, like I'm just never gonna be right on the Titans. And then eventually the shoe finally dropped on them.
Yeah.
I said this, asked this question to set up. You added something really fascinating. You it's something called fourth quarter win percentage over expected. What exactly is that?
Yeah, so it's really just another take on point differential and Pythagorean win expectation, which again takes it's got a formula that's pretty well known out there. Football Outsiders uses it a lot. That takes into account point differential and kind of where you should be from a win total perspective versus actual wins. And whenever historically you could have really made a lot of money in the past. Whenever there's a big gap between the expected wins and actual wins, you can find really good values from season to season. And so when I was looking at my preview last year and I was digging in and I was using a lot of the Pythag and a lot of the close one score game metrics, there were a lot of times I was looking at some of these games. I'm like, that really, I mean, even though it ended as a 7 point game, that really wasn't a one score game. The true kind of the spirit of why it's necessary to look at those things is if you continually getting lucky in kind of coin flip situations or unlucky, then you would think that that should regress to at least close to 50-50 the next season, because it's really hard to control that the bounce of the ball at the end of these games so often. And so, I was looking with my analyst and I said, look, I actually think that, eliminating some of these, lucky, these kind of backdoor situations where teams are scoring late to
The
make
Detroit
something.
Lions of 2 years ago, who always scored late and backdoored and made it look like they lost a lot of close games that they weren't in 2 years ago.
Right, exactly, and also the other way too, where team could be up 3 touchdowns late, and they've got essentially a 100% win probability, and a team, you play prevent, a team scores 2 touchdowns late to pad their stats or whatever. It's like that's not really they were getting blown out like that. That's not a 7 point game, and
Yeah,
a team that's up 3 touchdowns and scores 2 touchdowns late with on a pick six and a special teams fumble recovery or whatever whatever it could be. Like there's just so many fluky things that happens in the last 5 minutes or so of a game. So what I wanted to look at, all right, who were really what were the win probabilities, through the kind of halfway point of the fourth quarter, that really I think does a better job of measuring the true kind of essence of the game. There weren't any crazy fluky outcomes. There's a lot of things you can't control late in these games, and there's a lot of just when motivation changes, all those sorts of things. Once you get late in the game, I
yeah,
better look at kind of an earlier look at what the win probabilities are. So, my analyst did some work and he back tested some of this and said, really a little bit more predictive measure of next year's win totals really is measuring early, kind of the early fourth quarter win probability. And so we came up with kind of a blended number in terms of win probabilities throughout the fourth quarter, and you kind of come up with one number that makes sense, and that one was the most predictive. Going back over 20 years of data, and it's just it's slightly more predictive than Pythagorean, not a ton, but just enough to at least examine it. And really, where we found was looking at not just win totals, but really the alternative markets and to make the playoff markets. So really the find the biggest outliers, both from an exceeding expectations and underperforming expectations, and betting those kind of alts, picking up an extra win or an extra loss on the downside from an alt perspective, and getting essentially plus 190 on those, and then to make the playoffs and to miss the playoffs, and really kind of getting those tail outcomes that we see every year. And if we can find those teams that really underperformed or overperformed the most, what does that look like? And, it's been pretty successful going back, 20 years. You're talking about 25% ROI on the teams that, were overperforming. So you kind of faded those teams. And then, about a 10% ROI on the teams that were underperforming expectations. You can find some good gems. And last year we did really well. It was the first year we kind of rolled this out in the summer, and we hit on teams like Seattle on the upside and Minnesota. We had the Rams to miss the playoffs, and they're under alts. Like we had a lot of really, good hits. So, again, it's just it's a different way of looking at things. I personally like to see I think looking at win probability is a much better way of visioning. Did a team really get lucky here, or were they kind of down the entire
Yeah.
game and then just backdoored it? So it's just for me a better visually a way of looking at close games and what happens at the end of these games.
Yeah, I loved it. And when you really back tested it and showed, hey, here's how you would have done betting these alternate win totals, like that's one of my favorite parts in the preview. Okay, let's give people a little taster, but not give away the whole recipe. Can you give us one or two teams that were much luckier as far as fourth quarter win percentage, and two teams that were unlucky?
Yeah, well, the luckiest is easy. We've already talked about them. Minnesota, like I'm sure it's people are sick of talking about them, but to go 11-0 in one score games is definitely unheard of. Yeah, I mean, that's just it was mind boggling all season, and to happen, when you look back, it's pretty ridiculous. Some of the times that they won. I mean, they're the only team to win more than one game when they held less than a 10% win probability using my fourth quarter metrics, and those are pretty easy to remember. That's that Buffalo game with the Justin Jefferson catch, and then Josh Allen fumbling in his own end zone, and then it was that Saturday. I think it was Saturday
Indy, yeah,
Christmas game. Yeah, the
against
Saturday.
Indy,
What's that?
against
Yeah,
Indianapolis, where Indy
yeah.
was rolling.
Yeah, that was a 39-36. So those are, I mean, again, looking at, we knew that those were big comebacks, but then when you look at win probability, it makes it look even more improbable. So I mean, not only if you look at point differential too, they exceeded expectations by 4.5 games, which is just incredible. I mean, from either metric, whatever you want to use, they had the highest kind of exceeding expectations on the upside, the highest rate the NFL has seen in the last 22 years. And that's how far back my data goes. I don't go past earlier than 2000. It's by far, it's not even close. Like there's nobody even in
No.
the ballpark. So, and look, the markets understand that. And that's why their win totals 8.5 after winning 13 games last year. And I think the one thing that I try to do is me and you understand that, but I think that the average Joe maybe doesn't bet a lot or doesn't do this for a living, or is just not it's not something that they really study a lot. They'll just look at the win total and say, "Oh, how are the Vikings 8.5? That's an easy over." And then it's like when you put this in context as to
Yeah.
why the win total is where it is, and the market already reflects a lot of that regression. That's why I think it's valuable for people that don't follow this stuff. So again, me and you know this. We're not breaking any news here, but it's just interesting to take a look. I mean, when you go back to 2000, there's been 35 teams that had a win percentage differential as large as the Vikings, and they won just under 3 games less than next season. So it's not really a shock. Only 34% of these teams went over their win total. Again, the market is much smarter now, so that's probably factored in. It might have gone the other way. It might have gone too far, right?
I was about to say that
Yeah,
there's whenever there's a runaway narrative,
right.
the pendulum sometimes, like, take Cincinnati for example. Last year, the narrative was this wasn't a Super Bowl team, the one that went to the Super Bowl. They got lucky throughout the playoffs, and then I said, yeah, I buy that. They weren't as good as a team that should have been in the Super Bowl when they played the Rams, but I said they actually had a quietly really good offseason where they keep adding smart defensive pieces. They fixed the O line, and you also have to attribute Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase and all these guys taking a step forward. So oftentimes there's a balance of, yeah, that once the narrative
No.
gets running one way, sometimes you question, has it gone just a little bit too far?
Yeah, and that's where it gets difficult. And for me, I have no play on the Vikings either way. I will say, they were also very healthy. They had the fifth lowest adjusted games lost due to injury. Cousins, Jefferson, Thielen, Delvin, Cook all played 18 games, all 18 games. So they
I
had
think
zero injury. Yeah,
the whole O line too was like intact the entire season.
I think Darrisaw was the only one who missed a couple of games, and he is their best one. So that is one guy who they definitely lost that they needed, but otherwise all their skill guys were healthy all year. So for me, and then you just look at the Vikings in terms of if you're looking at their win total, like I talk about it in the preview. Just look at what Quessy, the GM, who came from Cleveland, so I know him pretty well. You just look at some of the moves he's made. They're not trying to win this year, so Normally I might say, all right, this thing is gone. Kind of, it's the pendulum has swung too much on the negative, but I don't think they're really trying to compete necessarily this year. He's smart enough to know that that was a complete outlier last year, and that's not
Yeah.
going to happen again. So he cut a lot of their older guys. Obviously, we saw Dalvin Cook and Thielen, and they traded Zadarius Smith. Like, they're not really trying to go for it this year, which is smart. I mean, it's really refreshing because you never see a GM do that. But from a win total perspective, it's probably not something that I'm interested in. So, they're probably the by far the luckiest team. I mean, there are some others who I would say we got luckier. Different aspects, I think, of luck is important. It's not, you don't have to necessarily be lucky in every category, but I mean, you
Sure.
look at from a health perspective. I mean, the Jets. Again, doing the preview, I think some of these things come to light, which were things I didn't realize until I dug in. The entire Jets secondary was injury free. As good as that defense was last year, and it was Robert Sala's defense with Sauce Gardner, et cetera, DJ Reed, like they didn't miss a single game. Their top three corners didn't miss a single game, which is very rare. Their entire defense was pretty healthy.
Yeah.
So when you look from year to year to expect that they're just going to come back the next year and add Aaron Rodgers and they're going to have the best defense in the NFL, it's like, well, maybe, but how can you possibly expect them to be fully healthy again? And would they have been so dominant on defense if they had kind of a normal injury rate? And we don't know. So looking at things like that, look at the Falcons offensive line. A lot of people are talking about how they're going to be grinders and Arthur Smith's offense, and they're going to run the ball down your throat. And their offensive line was top 5 in the league last year in a lot of the metrics. Well, four of their five best linemen played all 17 games. Again, the most probably the most physically draining position group in the NFL. To get your four best linemen to play all 17 is just not going to happen again. So you've got to account for that. So it's looking at those kind of specific data points and can teams overcome that if they do get the injury bug, or if I have opposing field goal percentage made against them, if a team kind of has a one way or another, if it regresses back to the mean, is how much does that affect them in close games? Like those sorts of things, I think are
Yeah.
pretty valuable. From an unlucky standpoint, I've got the Titans, and it's funny because, like you said, they were kind of the luckiest teams for a couple of years in a row, exceeding expectations. So maybe this is just the complete, the pendulum completely swinging, and maybe it won't go back the other way next season. But they lost 5 games where they led or the game was tied with less than 3 minutes remaining. They had 2 games where they had over an 80% win probability midway through the fourth quarter and lost. If you remember that opener with the Giants, that was one of my
Yeah.
biggest bets of the season early on, was with that Giants team. They scored late. Tennessee came all the way down and had a very makeable 43-yard field goal that was either blocked or missed. So they had a couple of those situations where they held a big win probability and just couldn't hold the lead late. Which was very opposite of what they saw in prior years. They were the second biggest underachiever from the fourth quarter win probability standpoint over expected. They should have won more like 9.5 games than the 7 that they won last year. So typically teams like that underperform to that extent improve their win totals the next season by close to 2 games. So you should see some sort of level of improvement, but that offense could be so bad that it may not matter. They only recovered this. They recovered the second lowest percentage of fumbles in the league, and their opponent made the 6th lowest field goal percentage against them. So it kind of went both ways. And then the injury bug hit them, especially on defense. Yeah, everybody on defense got hurt. They suffered the most adjusted games lost using the Football Outsiders metric on defense in the NFL. So they were banged up a ton, and they were still number 1 in the NFL against the run. So there are
Yeah.
reasons to like them actually going forward, but they were definitely one of the unlucky teams.
All right, let's talk about wide range of outcomes for teams, because we could sit there and do a 1 hour podcast about the Chiefs and the Bengals and talk about their upside and downside, and let's be real, there's not much daylight between it. Whereas I like to talk about the teams where their seasons could be really good or really bad, and oftentimes if you guess right, you can have some big opportunities going against market. Let's start off with the Washington Commanders. Uh, Washington was a team that we backed a lot last year. This year, though, I think their wide range of outcomes is tied to a complete unknown in Sam Howell. Are you high or low on Washington?
I'm lower, and it's not necessarily. because I don't think they've got talent on the roster. They have a good defense. I think it's probably the most underrated defense. From an EPA perspective, they were they're fifth in the NFL, but they for a while they were kind of middle of the pack. But the only reason was because turnovers are factored so highly when it comes to EPA that the first handful of games, I don't think they created a single turnover for the first like 4 or 5 games. They did, it was maybe one. And so their EPA numbers were actually way lower than they should have been. But their success rate was top 5 in the NFL. So I remember they were going up against the Bears. I think that was a pick'em game, and I was on Washington, and I didn't understand because I knew that the underlying metrics like their defense a lot more than the EPA and some other things, and they're putting their offense in some bad spots. So I think from a defensive perspective, they're really good. They get back Chase Young. They are young in the secondary. They added a couple of highly drafted rookies. Emmanuel Forbes is going to play corner for them, who's one of the biggest playmakers from Mississippi State in the draft. So the upside is there for the defense to continue on being really good. I'm not a Sam Howell fan. I had them actually in Week 18 against Dallas, and they ended up winning that game pretty easily. And he hit a couple of big plays, but he didn't really show me much. Jacoby Brissett's there again. I'm from Cleveland. I know how well he played last year, but he needed very specific surroundings for him to succeed. He needed a very good offensive line, a really good run game, and enough weapons to compete, and a good offensive coach. And you don't really get that in Washington. Their offensive line is pretty jumbled up. It wasn't great last year. They lost a couple pieces, didn't really add much from that perspective. And so I'm not sure the offensive line's there. I mean, I don't think Brian Robinson's a really good running back. He was kind of stuck in mud last year a little bit. He's just
Yeah.
okay. They have really good weapons outside, but just if he can't get protected and he can't use the run game and play action, et cetera, like he's not. Brissett's really not the guy to lead that team. So I do have questions there. Their schedule's brutal for a team that's not looked to be highly rated. So when amongst my lower power rated teams, they have the toughest schedule, them and the Raiders in the NFL. They're the only ones who have one of the top 10 toughest schedules amongst the bad teams. So they got some unfair breaks there. So I can never back a team that I just don't have faith with the quarterback and have so many
Yeah.
holes along the offensive line. So I'm more on the negative. Look, if they won 9 games, it wouldn't shock me, but this is not a team that I'm, just dying to back just because there's just too many holes there. And I just think that the schedule is just way, way too hard.
All right. You alluded to the Jets, and there's a group of people who say, you know what, this team is Super Bowl ready. We've seen the whole veteran quarterback comes into a ready-made situation a few years ago with Tampa Bay and Tom Brady, the Rams a couple years ago with Stafford, and then last year Russell Wilson with Denver. When you look at Aaron Rodgers on the Jets, are you higher? Are you as high as the rest of the market in thinking that they could be Super Bowl contenders? Are you lower, or are you in wait and see mode?
Yeah, I'm right. I'm in kind of the neutral spot. I think the number 9.5 is perfect for them. I think they're right in that range. But I do think that there are cases to be made that if things fall, the right way, if everybody's best case in the league occurred, they would be one of the top contenders for the Super Bowl, no doubt about it. So, if Aaron Rodgers, if last year was just an anomaly that his receivers dropped too many balls, his PFF grade compared to his EPA was a lot better, and that he had one of the highest drop rates in the NFL amongst his receivers. And he didn't have many good receivers there. If it's simple as that, he becomes another. He's back to being a top 10 quarterback, and the defense again stays healthy, and they don't suffer the typical kind of volatile year to year change we see with a lot of these good defenses. Then there's plenty of reasons to like them. I mean, I will say on defense, they did not force. It's one thing when you really rank highly because you force a ton of turnovers, high leverage
Yeah.
situations. They didn't really do that. Like they were good without creating impactful turnovers, which I think it bodes very well for them. So yeah, there's clearly reasons to like them. It's always difficult. You find these highly touted quarterbacks that switch teams. Tom Brady's really the only one recently that it's really worked. I mean, Russell Wilson, we saw it didn't work. Matt Ryan, he might have been just completely washed, but that didn't work.
Stafford as well, but
It's true.
oddly enough, the Rams and Tampa didn't enter the playoffs as like
No.
top 3 seeds, and look like I think Tampa was a wild card team and the Rams were the 4th place division winner. And it didn't matter in the end. They ended up building enough momentum in like a 3-game sample size when it mattered most in the playoffs.
I will say the other problem too is they start off their schedules brutal right off the bat,
It's
so you don't get
brutal.
to. Yeah, I mean, look at Tom Brady when that rookie that first season with Tampa, first few games he was awful. People were talking about, oh, I mean, he's washed, he's done, he needed Belichick, right? And then they
Yeah.
started to figure things out towards halfway towards the season. They had their bye week and they really started to explode. And it could be a similar case like that. So you might get, to me, the best way to play the Jets is you get, I mean, look, you get Buffalo, you get Dallas, New England, Kansas City, Denver, and Philly to start. Just an absolute gauntlet to start the season.
Yeah.
If they go 3-3 in the first 6 games, they have a real shot. So maybe it's worth just waiting out the first month of the year, see
Yeah.
where they stand, because the odds of them being 5-1 or something or 6-0 is really low. So if you can maybe get a better price on them, I think that's where you'd want to look. Is let's wait a few games. Let's assume that they're going to essentially go 500 early on, and then that's where you pounce and you maybe get a little bit more value. And you just risk that the Jets are not going to come out that hot and just blow everybody away right away. So that's the way I would play it. But I clearly think that there's ways for the Jets to exceed expectations and to make it to the Super Bowl. It's definitely not impossible.
All right, let's talk about this team because it feels like everywhere I look, all the smart guys are bullish on them, and a friend Sharp Clark was talking about the Falcons for the division, and then I heard Rob Pizzola and Suma and Eric Eager and Steve Fezzik. Everybody's talking about love for the Falcons, and the Will Smith meme where in Fresh Prince of Bel-Air when he's in the empty living room and he's wondering if he's alone with his with himself, and I'm not buying this Falcons team, and I was wondering if I would have an ally, and then I finally saw your preview, and I said I've got an ally. Okay, here's somebody else who also doesn't believe in all the steam on the Falcons. What's the reason that's holding you back?
Well, look, I think I projected them to win 8 games or so. So I'm right on the market. It's not like, I think they're going to win 5 games or anything like that. But so let's step back. Why do people like them? Because you can poke holes through all of these narratives, and obviously you can go the other way. But the
And big
first
money agency.
yeah, the first thing is schedule a division, right? Yeah, division's not great. I clearly think the Saints are much better, but okay. They say, oh well, they're going to face. Look at all these bad quarterbacks they face. Well, then I'll say, well, look at your quarterback. They're all saying the same thing about Desmond Ritter, who was like 40th in EPA last year. Like he wasn't good. He faced all backups. Literally every quarterback he faced was a backup. Tyler Huntley, Andy Dalton, David Blau. He faced Kyle Trask and Blaine Gabbert in the finale against a Tampa team that sat everybody in the second half because it was a meaningless game for them. He faced Arizona, who was essentially they were only playing because it was JJ Watt's farewell. Like nobody. I mean, Baltimore had Tyler Huntley. Like it was. He faced the easiest set of. I guess besides the Ravens defense, like it was as easy as you can get for a situation to come in late. So, like, I won't. If you look at his schedule, like, where is Desmond Ritter head and shoulders above any of the other starting quarterbacks they're facing? Like, the only ones that I would say, all right, I'll take Ritter over this guy, would probably be Sam Howell. But if Jacoby Brissett's starting, I'd probably take Brissett. And the only other one would be Baker Mayfield, and even then, that's a debate. Baker Mayfield's actually won games in the NFL, so from that perspective, I don't buy it that just because they face an easy set of quarterbacks, well, your quarterback stinks too. And then the other, what people will say is, oh, look at they were in all these games last year, they weren't expected to. I think they went 5-9 or 5-8 in quote unquote one score games, which I think is complete nonsense if you actually dig in. Again, that's where the win probability stuff comes into play because there's a handful of games, and I remember because I bet them all, where they were getting blown out early in the fourth quarter, and then all of a sudden they get a couple of fluky plays late, and the game ends up as a one-score game. They were not in most of those games. Against the Rams, they were down like 21-3 at halftime. Against Tampa, it was like 21-0 until they scored a couple late touchdowns. Like a lot of these games that they were never really in, that they get credit for. So I don't really buy that there's any sort of regression from that standpoint. They were exactly where they should have been. And then you look at, this is a run first offense. They're going to just, Arthur Smith and his offensive line is just going to, with Bijan Robinson, they're going to run right through these teams. And it's like, well, since when is running the football a good thing as your number one key to success on offense? I don't know why all of a sudden people are just turning their, deciding to go back on passing the football and all of a sudden running the football is such a great thing. Yeah, that's a good idea if you can stay in these games, because if you're down early, you can't use the run to come back. So it's only in games where they get a lead where the run game is really going to be sustainable. I mean, Tyler Algier was one of the top 10 running backs in the NFL last year by every metric. So as good as Bijan and Cordell Patterson ran for over 5 yards per carry. Like, even if Bijan Robinson is really good, how much better can he be than those guys? I don't think it's really that additive.
No,
Um,
it felt redundant
yeah,
actually, like, for them to add Bijan Robinson considering they had a lot of big holes everywhere else.
yeah, and then again, the offensive line, great. They were awesome last year. Like I said, 4 of the 5 linemen, their best ones, played all 17 games. That's probably not going to happen again, and they're probably not going to play at that same exact level again. So you're automatically going to see a little bit of a drop off. And then defensively, they were the worst pass defense in the NFL based on my metrics when you adjust for opponent, which they faced literally the highest percentage of QBs that were either backups or ranked 30th or worse in EPA. Like, they were really bad. So they faced a really easy schedule. You're going to face an easy one again, but it may not be anywhere near as bad as that one. And all these free agent additions, like, let's go through them. Jesse Bates, really good safety. Safety doesn't move the needle. Like, there's no if Jesse Bates plays or gets hurt, like that, the point spread's not going to move at all. It's a nice player to have, but that really isn't going to solve the issues in the secondary. They added Jeffrey Okuda and Mike Hughes to be your
And
number
Trey
2 and 3.
Flowers.
Yeah,
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 nothing spectacular there.
yeah, and then defensively, on the pass rush, Bud Dupree. Bud Dupree's been washed for 3 years. He was a mediocre pass rusher in Tennessee, with maybe the best defensive front outside of Philly, that he had in Tennessee, and he can only muster 6 sacks and kind of league average or below average pressure rates. Like, he's not gonna all of a sudden come into Atlanta and be some superstar. So, like, and they've got a couple other nice players, Caden Ellis, David Onyemata. I mean, Calais Campbell is going to be 37 years old. He can't play a full allotment of snaps. So the defense will be improved, but, like, how much better can that defense be? I'm not really sure. So, long story short, yeah, are there scenarios where this team can win 10 games where Desmond Ritter improves as maybe a lead, the 20th ranked quarterback? Sure, there's absolutely scenarios, but that where that can happen. But why is it automatic? Like, what's the upside? He's a third round pick. He was awful last year in limited duty against bad competition. Like, where is this pedigree coming from that all of a sudden we're supposed to give him the benefit of the doubt that he's got the possibility of being a top half of the NFL quarterback? I'm not sure where that's kind of automatic, and way more downward scenarios here than there are upwards. And I just don't think I don't agree with backing a team with a quarterback who just, to me, has very little shot of being above average. So, like, anyway, I'm always wary of these teams that get all the pub in the offseason, that surprise the prior year. I just, you can't just use schedule to be a reason why, and that be the only reason why you're going to win the division or win the NFC. But that's just me.
I also don't like the fact that when people talk about their offensive weapons like Drake London and Kyle Pitts and then the 3 running backs, I'm like, that's not a dangerous defense to defend, offense to defend against, because there's no threat of a deep ball at all. And if teams can crouch down and play you in a box, that's not exactly a dangerous team that you've got to worry about on offense. And you pointed to all their defensive metrics, like they were 30th in defensive DVOA last year. I don't see a big improvement from that standpoint. So again, like I'm not. I have the Falcons as like my 25th power rated team. That's going to get to about 7.5, 8 wins just because of the schedule. But I'm not. I don't think I'm buying the absolute tail outcome for them.
And what about the fact that, okay, Drake London, yeah, good prospect. Who's behind him? They've got Mac Hollins and Scotty Miller as their number 2 and 3 receivers. So one injury or a poor season out of London, and you've got nothing behind him. So again, it's a very flimsy roster, And I think that, spending a lot in free agency has never been, really you don't necessarily see all the fruits of those labors, in year one. But I don't know. I think that they're just getting a little bit too much hype for me, and I just give me a little better quarterback. If you had Derek Carr there, I would feel a lot better, honestly. I just Desmond Ritter just didn't do it for me last year. He dropped in the draft. He was picked behind a lot of bad quarterbacks. I mean, this is one of the worst quarterback drafts that we've seen, and he went in the third round. And he didn't do anything last year to show me that he deserves the respect to be bet on to win the division. Like, that's just crazy to me. There's nothing elite about the rest of this roster, at least offensively, that I would say, all right, like he's going to have a great run game, a great defense. So he just needs to not make mistakes. There's just nothing about that defense that would ever get me there. So I don't know how you can back a guy who, hasn't proven anything and doesn't have the pedigree. This isn't Jordan Love, who's a first round pick, who's played way less snaps than Desmond Ritter. This is a guy who's a third round pick and struggled last year in kind of the easiest final four games you can have. So count me as someone who's not high on the Falcons, although I'm not going to fade them.
All right. One more team, and then we'll get into your Super Bowl pick. This team has gotten some love in the offseason. It's the Chicago Bears. What are you looking at when you look at the Bears and their wide range of outcomes?
Yeah, I'm an Ohio State guy, so I trust me. I want Justin Fields to be really good. I don't think that he's a pocket quarterback. Even when guys are open, there's plenty of data out there that says even when guys are open, he's not hitting them. He's not accurate, and he holds onto the ball a lot. Look, he was awesome. He was electric last year. I bet on their overs a lot at the end of the year. They were really fun to watch, but it's just not sustainable. I mean, the amount of pounding he's going to take. We already saw he got hurt last year. He's not Lamar Jackson, where Lamar like sidesteps and runs out of bounds. Justin Fields will take you on, and he's not that big of a guy. He's not Cam Newton. So I think that's just so risky. The second that he gets hurt, this team is they're the worst team in the NFL, potentially. So, it's hard for me to really love them, to win a bunch of games. Yeah, from a regression standpoint, they were unlucky in a lot of metrics. They did face, one of the tougher schedules in the NFL. They were 1-7 in one score games. They got unlucky late. So, for just that alone, it's already factored in the win total. I mean, 7.5 from where they were last year. It's a 4.5 win jump year over year. And, I looked at that. They're one of 6 teams since 2000 with a win total jump of at least 4.5 wins from the prior year. Obviously, I'm only looking at, if you got to at least win 3 games. I'm not looking at the teams that went over because that's automatic. The over is hitting 2 of those cases, but most of those big gaps in win totals was because a star quarterback went down and the season was lost for that team. So it was just a matter of getting that quarterback back. This is a very rare case of a team getting so much love and inflation in the marketplace. And they didn't spend wisely on defense. First of all, this is and defensively, once they traded Roquan Smith, this was the worst this might have been the worst defense the NFL has seen in a long time. Like, they were not last in EPA. They lapped the field in EPA in the second half of the season. It was just atrocious, and they didn't really do anything in the secondary. It's very young secondary. Guys like, Jalen Johnson's fine, but Tyreek Stevenson, the rookie out of Miami, is starting. You got Kyler Gordon, another young guy. They have a ton of young players in the secondary who didn't play well last year. Their pass rush was a mess after they traded Roquan Smith and Robert Quinn, and they didn't add anything to it. They added DeMarcus Walker was the best guy that they added. They spent all their money on linebackers. TJ Edwards is a fine player. That actually was a good contract. I mean, signing Tremaine Edmonds for as much money as they did just didn't make any sense to me when they had such a need at pass rush. So I just didn't think they allocated their capital well. Their front seven is still, very poor. And you can't, to me, I would not back a team with a defense that's probably bottom 5 again. It's just, unless your quarterback's Patrick Mahomes, I'm not taking you to go 500 if you've got one of the worst defenses in the NFL. So I don't know. I don't. Yeah, they'll win some games. They'll win some games they shouldn't. And I think this line is reflecting that that this is probably they're probably in that range of 6-7 wins. Maybe they get to 8 if they're lucky, but they're not a team that I'm really considering to be a sleeper playoff team.
No, I was talking with Tay Seth about the Bears, and I said, like, spending $18 million on Tremaine Edmonds when every other good linebacker in the free agency went for 5 to 6 million is ridiculous. Like, triple the next range of guys. Don't go out and spend big money on a pass rusher. I didn't love their draft. Like, I wasn't a fan of either of the defensive tackles that they took. And honestly, I was a little offended that the Bears had lower odds to win the division than the Packers. Like, to me, there was a clear disconnect in the Bears were the team that was being steamed early, and I'm like, I think you guys are missing the mark here, man. I get it. There's a young, flashy quarterback, but the defense was atrocious. Like, you could almost blindly bet their overs towards the end
Yeah.
of the season because the games were going to be shootouts. Everything was going to be in the 30s.
Yeah, I mean, so I will say the reason that I know why they spent the money on Tremaine Edmonds is because, you look at Matt Eberflus in Indianapolis, he had Shaq Leonard, like he needs that linebacker to kind of control the defense. He loves linebackers in his scheme, but still, it's just a waste of money in my opinion. I knew they had money to spend, but they didn't need to do that. And so when you even look at, again, part of my preview, one thing I wanted to depict with um, these single page previews is you see the bottom left hand side. I looked at kind of, you can talk about what's your overall EPA offense defense, but I wanted to know on a game to game basis how consistently were you holding your opponents, for example, to an EPA below their season average. And you can see I've got kind of a bar chart with a line. You can see what the opponents were expected to produce and how much they actually did produce. And you see a lot of negatives from the defensive side on kind of a negative performance week to week, starting in week 8. Like they didn't hold any offense below their expected EPA, I think, except for one time in week 15. So that's just another way to take a look at that. But the consistency level was just so poor. They got thrashed by everybody, and so I don't know if it's going to be that much better this year.
All right. I said we'll talk about your Super Bowl pick. Who do you like coming out of the AFC and who do you like coming out of the NFC?
So I copped out and I took the the Chiefs again. But how am I gonna fade a team that where Patrick Mahomes has made the AFC title game in every single one of his seasons? Like who's gonna fade that? Like I could have gone with Baltimore. I think that I had them, I think, as the number one seed. I really think they're gonna do well. I think Lamar's gonna really shine in that Todd Monken system. I think those added weapons will be positive. They're a team that underperformed, even though they won 10 games last year, which was a rarity. They're a team that blew a lot of leads. It could have been a lot better. And obviously, if he stays healthy, they're good. They're going to be really good this year. I just went with old reliable, so I'll go with the Chiefs, and I have Dallas in the NFC, which maybe is a little more controversial. I'm not sure, but I just think they're really, really well rounded. I love the pickups of Brandon Cooks and Stephon Gilmore on each side of the ball. Like those were like they already had top 10 level offense and defense, and those are just like cherry on top because it's exactly what they needed on each side of the ball. They needed a down the field threat that they weren't getting really with anybody else on the roster, and Michael Gallup wasn't doing it. So Brandon Cooks was perfect on the outside for them. You
Yeah.
can, CD Lamb's going to move all over the field. He can be used as a chess piece in the slot, etc. Going to really create some tough mismatches. And then defensively, Gilmore was still really good. This is back-to-back years. He was a top 20 graded cornerback by PFF. And he's, him and Diggs is a really nice combo there. So I think it fits perfectly for what they need on each side of the ball. And otherwise, they're a really complete team. I mean, you're going to see a lot more explosiveness with more carries and more touches from Tony Pollard versus what we saw with Zeke. Holding him back last year, you're not going to have that albatross there. So I think that's additive. I mean, the only area of concern I have with them is the coaching staff. I mean, I think I'm not a huge Mike McCarthy fan. And I mean, Brian Schottenheimer, I could not believe that's who they decided to replace Kellen Moore. I don't understand that one, but maybe it's just going to be really McCarthy running the show, and Schottenheimer is just the figurehead, right? So I feel a little bit better about that, but that's the one area that's a little bit scary for me. They just have so much talent that I'm just kind of betting on the talent more than the coaching. And then defensively, they'd be really good. Dan Quinn's back. He did a really good job last year. I have no qualms about that defense. The only time last year that they struggled, there's a late stretch about a 4 week stretch where they struggled towards the end of the year defending the pass, and that was really when Anthony Brown went down. He was their
Yeah.
number 2 corner. They had nobody else to really replace him. So now with Gilmore in there, I mean, you got to really it's a big upgrade from a value perspective. And so again, as long as they are they don't get too banged up. I think that's just a quality defense and offense. You got Michael Parsons wrecking havoc. Like there's no weakness. Find me the weakness on this on both sides of the ball. It's very, very tough. So I'm just going with the team that I think is the most talented. And I think Philly, as good as they've been, they faced such a cake schedule last year, and obviously we saw in this NFC title game, you get essentially not playing against a quarterback. Like they had every break in the book. As much as I love them, there is that disease of me out there. It happens a lot, even to the best of them. So I still think they make the playoffs. I just don't think they're going to get to the Super Bowl again. And I think Dallas is just a better overall team this year.
Yeah, I was talking to Rob Pizzola. I'm like, Dallas, I thought their offseason was very surgical. They didn't fill in a million things. They just said, we want two impact players. And they go and they get Cooks and Gilmore at two positions where they needed depth. The Kansas City thing, you said, like, it's hard to go against Patrick Mahomes. I have had a 20-year beef with Tom Brady fans because I am adamant to this day that at his peak, Peyton Manning was a far better quarterback than Tom Brady, and I believe also Aaron Rodgers. Just from a thrower of the ball perspective, because he breaks every chart. I said Tom Brady's greatness, though, comes from what he did post age 37 and his longevity. And obviously you can't take away his accolades. So that's what makes him the greatest. So I'm fighting back, Cleveland. After conceding that Tom Brady was the GOAT, I now troll everybody and restart the argument. And my line is always Patrick Mahomes is everything you guys have pretended Tom Brady is, because he's got the Peyton Manning, I'm going to win 5 MVPs and be the best player of my generation. But he's also racking up accolades at the rate that Tom Brady did. And Patrick Mahomes is my revenge tour on everybody who I had the Peyton Manning and Tom Brady argument with and had to concede. I cannot wait for the day that Patrick Mahomes has surpassed Tom in front of everybody's minds.
I mean, it's just incredible. And you see these articles, or I mean, I think PFF had, I don't know, what was it that Brady wasn't, or Mahomes, he wasn't like top 5 in certain graded throws or something. It was just something ridiculous. Like it's like people are just dying to unseat him, and I get it. Like this, just people get sick of dominance, but he is by far the best quarterback in the NFL and could end up being the best of all time. And I mean, look, if you weren't going to get him last year, like when are you going to get him? They had a completely revamped wide receiving corps. He got hurt in the playoffs. Was
Jacksonville.
barely even
Jacksonville
able to
was
walk. He's
yeah.
barely even able to walk, and he still wins a Super Bowl. Like, what else? I mean, if you're not going to fade him then, and he's not going to drop then, when is that going to happen? So I'm not going to be the one to do that. So I'm just going to ride him as long as I can. Like I said, I mean, Baltimore would be a team that I really like as another option, but I'm just going to go with the Chiefs. And again, your Bengals, which you've done a nice job backing them the last couple of years. Look, they've avoided the injury bug until the postseason, right? Like they got hit with offensive line bug, and it affected them late. But in general, they've been fairly healthy, but they are almost blowout proof. I mean, I have the stat in there. I don't think they've lost by more than a field goal with Jamar Chase in the lineup since like 5 games into his rookie season. It's been some insane number of consecutive games that when they lose and he's in the lineup, it's they barely lose, and otherwise they win. So they're going to be right there, but I don't. It's hard. I think they lost enough talent defensively. I think that we don't know what's going to happen with Mixon, and there's T Higgins is going to want some money soon. Like they're starting to. There could be a couple cracks there. Where, I'm not going to take them. They're the most popular pick to go to the Super Bowl, and I'm just not there right now. But and the division stuff too. So.
I've gotten flack for saying I think every team is a top 12 power rated team in the division. And I loved it because you went out and made every team with a winning record in that division. I'm like, all right, I'm not alone in this understanding that everyone's good. The Cleveland's the team I want to buy the absolute right tail. If Deshaun Watson looks anything like he did in Houston, top 5 receiver, and Cleveland finally fixed the D line after what seems like 5 years since Myles Garrett got there. They're finally well-rounded, multiple pass rushers, fixed the interior D line. And as long as like the top 6 linebackers don't get hurt again this year, I like Cleveland's defense a lot this year.
Yeah, and you had the Jim Schwartz factor. It's they have not had a consistent pass rush opposite Myles Garrett. I mean, Clowney's been okay at times, but he's in and out of the lineup. He doesn't even want to play half the time. To get not just Zadarius Smith, but Okunronquo from
I
Houston, who
love
no one, yeah, and only nerds like us
Yeah.
and PFF follow and realize that guy he's exceeded expectations the last couple of years. I mean, his pressure rate is one amongst the better ones in the league. They have 3 top 20 pressure rate edge rushers, in the lineup, which is I don't know if anybody else can say that. They've never had that. They signed Delvin Tomlinson to help shore off the middle of the run defense. Juan Thornhill and Rodney McLeod, 2 good safeties they signed. They've got 3 good cornerbacks. Like they've got everything you need. Jim Schwartz is proven to always put quality defenses out there. His attacking style, like this is a really good roster. Offensively, you got a top 10 offensive line. You got potentially a top 10 quarterback, maybe the best running back in the NFL. Like, this is it. Like, this is the prove it year. Kevin Stefanski will not make it past this year if they don't, at least win 9 or 10 games, in my opinion, because the talent's too good. So, yeah, I agree with you. The teams that are not favored to make the playoffs, they're by far, in my opinion, the best kind of longer shot to get there. So we'll see. I'm a Cleveland fan, and we always get disappointed. So I'm just bracing for that. But I agree with you.
All right. I wanna thank you, ClevTA. You've been so generous with your time, man.
No, I appreciate it. I'd love to come on another time. So thanks and appreciate all your hard work here.
Where can people get the preview? Where can they find it?
Yeah, well, you can either go on my Twitter profile at ClevTA or just go to cleveanalytics.com and there's a NFL preview tab there. So, and the NFL content page. So, yeah, like I said, it's free. Hopefully people enjoy it and, you get some sort of nugget out of it. And if not, then at least there's some pretty colors on the page. But I hope everyone gets something out of it.
Perfect. We're going to link that into the description on the YouTube page. That was ClevTA plus EV Bettor, creator for the Hammer Betting Network and owner of CleveAnalytics.com. I'm G-Stack George, and this was 90 Degrees. That's it for me. Another edition of 90 Degrees is in the books. I want to thank my guest, ClevTA plus EV Bettor, creator for the Hammer Betting Network and owner of CleveAnalytics.com. I also want to thank the sponsors of this show, Pinnacle and BetStamp, and my producer, Jason Cooper. Thanks for listening. Do me a favor before you go, like the content, subscribe, share, and comment. And I want you to do me one extra favor. Check out our Forward Progress YouTube channel. We're doing a fantastic job. We're breaking down previews of every team in every division and what to look forward to going into the season. Anyways, we'll be back next week with another guest on the 90 Degrees podcast where we give an inside look into the sports betting industry. That's it for me. Hope you enjoyed. Until next time.